Welcome to Talmudic Treasures. Today we're learning Suvos page 85, which discusses a person on their deathbed. If they make a specific declaration as to who they should have all their monies given to, that's exactly what we're supposed to do. The question arises when the person is very vague. Imagine that he says that I want my possessions to be given to Tuvia. Now, there's no last name, and it was really not specified. So on this, the Talmud says, if it happens to be that a Tuvia, which may not be the most common Hebrew name, if a man with that name strolls into our courts and asks for this money, we're going to give it to them. We're going to say, well, he mentioned Tuvia, and here's a Tuvia, so it must be his. Now, interestingly enough, what happens if instead of Tuvia coming, it's a person who is a rabbi, who is called Rabbi Tuvia or Rav Tuvia? So in this, the Talmud says, I'm sorry, this is not acceptable. Because being a rabbi, you certainly have to show that individual great levels of respect. And because of that, this person who came in, who is Rav Tuvia, he cannot be the person, because he would not have just called him Tuvia just by his first name. However, the Talmud does say that if this person is known to have had a very close relationship with the person who had deceased, who had died, then in that situation we will give it to Rabbi Tuvia. And the fact that he left his name of Rabbi out doesn't mean it was referring to a different person. It just simply means that he had a close relationship and he called him by his first name without calling him Rabbi. And then the Talmud says something very fascinating. What if you have two Tuvias? One is a Talmud Chacham, a scholar, a righteous individual, and the other person, who's also Tuvia, happens to be a next-door neighbor. So even though one is usually pretty close to their neighbors, the law is that we will give it to the Tuvia, who is the Talmud Chacham, because it's understood that a person, as they are on their last moments before they die, they want to be able to do good with their money. And therefore, it's understood, instead of just giving it to some random neighbor who may be your friend, a person would rather support a scholar, someone who values Torah and perhaps could benefit from the money. And by you giving that, it's a special thing to do because you're supporting a scholar. Now, it gets even more interesting. What happens if you have not just a relative, but you have a relative who's Tuvia and you have a neighbor who is Tuvia? On this, the Talmud quotes the 27th chapter in Proverbs and says, greater is a close relative than a distant, better is rather a close neighbor than a distant relative. So according to the words in Proverbs, a person could potentially have a closer relationship with their neighbors than someone who just may be related to you and is not necessarily very, very close. Now, of course, in the event that the relative is someone that you're very, very close with, so then it would stand to reason, based on the Talmud later saying Shuddha, that we will assume that that's probably the person that you would want to give to. However, if you have a distant relative whose name is Tuvia, and you have a neighbor that you're close with, so in fact we would give to the neighbor. Now, of course, all of this is because we decipher and we have to understand what would a person want to do as far as giving of their money. And as we said, the greatest thing that a person can do is to give charity to someone who is a Talmudic scholar, someone who's a Torah scholar and values the ways of Torah and that way of holiness and spirituality. So much so that we say that he would rather have given it to him than to a close relative or a neighbor.